千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Daodejing by Lao Zi. Previously, I brought up the chapter title of the Daodejing. When I began talking about chapter titles, I think a month ago, it really took some people by surprise, because despite many years of studying the Daodejing in the West, they had never seen the chapter titles previously. And it's true, most of the translations skip over the Chinese chapter titles, and this is because there's no recognized universal standard. But then the same is true for the lines of the Daodejing, that there are slight variations when you go from one to the other. Most of the time, the meaning represented by the lines remain the same, so the slight variations don't make a huge amount of difference. In the case of the chapter titles, it would be an extra burden for the translator. I can sort of understand why they don't talk about it all that much. I decided to include it in the spirit of authenticity. That's right. If you are looking for the most accurate depiction of the Daodejing that is possible today, you are in the right place. What we're doing, what I aspire to offer, is the real deal, the most authentic teaching available. I do understand that there are people who will say, no such thing is possible, it's all interpretation. I respectfully disagree. And I think that as you follow along and see the way that we are going through these chapters, line by line, in detail, I think you would agree that there is a difference between an accurate depiction of the Daodejing and what is typically available out there. So then, let me briefly talk about the chapter title. The Tao is plain. That chapter title is the translation of one of the two variants. It's the one on the left, where the first character is the Tao. The second character means a flat, easy to travel road, a wide avenue. And then the third character there is the character for chapter. The alternative name is the Great Tao Chapter, and that's the one in parentheses. As we will see, getting into this particular chapter, it is both about the Great Tao and also about the Tao being the easy path to walk, the wide avenue. That actually has a whole bunch of ramifications that we need to explore. Just as there is a path that is central, that is easy to walk, the yin and yang principle pretty much tells you that there's also going to be the complement. The small paths, the side paths that are not central, that are not the Tao, that branch off into all kinds of weird directions, that end up not getting you in the most effective, efficient way to go from point A to point B. So that's part of our discussion today. Let me take everyone to the chapter itself so we can talk about the way that we divided up the chapter previously. So as you can see, we have a chapter here with 14 lines. Previously, we were able to divide up the lines into 4 sections. Section 1, going from line 1 to line 5, is about the Great Tao, the great path through life. So the Great Tao is easy to walk, but in line 5, Lao Tzu says, people like the side paths. The side paths are not the Tao. He makes that very plain at the very end of this chapter, not the Tao. So between line 5 and line 14, Lao Tzu talks a lot about the manifestations of the not Tao, that which is not the Tao. What happens when you do not follow a life of Tao cultivation, greater harmony, compassion for your fellow human beings, doing the right things for the right reasons at the right time, and so on? Well, it's a life of negativity, and there are sure signs that would enable people to tell, and Lao Tzu is listing a bunch of examples that he wants to get into in greater detail. It starts from line 6. Line 6, 7, and 8 is the reality of the situation. This is what we're going to be getting into today. We'll talk a little bit about the difference between the Great Tao and the side paths. Then we'll talk about the manifestations of what happens when your life has strayed far from the Tao, that you are living through a life of negativity rather than the positive energy that the Tao can bring you. Then, furthermore, from line 9 to line 12, Lao Tzu talks about the superficial exterior appearance of the non-Tao, not Tao, trying to present a good front, but it's only a false front, a superficial appearance. So we'll talk more about that too. Then the last 2 lines are the conclusion. And here, as we will also discuss, Lao Tzu gets as emphatic as he has ever been through the entire Daodejing. And I will talk about the reason why he's so emphatic. He's emphasizing this point more than any other point in the totality of the Daodejing. I'll talk about why. So last time we got to line 5. Today, we're actually going to take half a step back. I'm going to provide a recap from line 1 to line 5, and then we'll go through a quick discussion on the difference between the Great Tao and the side paths. Starting with the Great Tao for our recap. So we, by now, I think, have all become very familiar with the travel-based metaphor for the Tao. The Tao is the path, it's the way. Life is a journey. We hopefully traverse on the path, not veer away too much. That's the metaphor. So let's begin with the Great Tao. In ancient times, the idea for the Great Tao, and keep in mind that this is before the age of automobiles, before the age of transportation, that's mechanized. So in ancient times, the Great Tao is visualized as a well-trodden path. Could be well-trodden by other travelers, travelers before you, horses, carriage, etc. Well-trodden path. So the idea is that many have already made the path, travel to a distant destination, so the path now is easy to see through the land. You can't miss it. There are other people traveling on it. Now, what about today? What about in modern times? Well, with our modern metaphors, thankfully, things haven't changed all that much. We can still apply this ancient idea. In modern times, the Great Tao, easy to travel, will be a paved road. So here's the image to accompany that. However we visualize and represent the concept of the Great Tao, the wide path, the best route, the central idea among them is the same. The Tao is the proven path. It's the path where a lot of work has already been done. The ancient sages, the ancient masters of the Tao have already walked the Tao. They kept track of their progress. They made maps and directions to provide for the travelers who come after them to make things a little bit easier. So there's no need to explore. There's no need to do anything other than to just follow what has already been made very clear. So that's the idea. And when you talk about the paved road, it's even more evident because a lot of planning has gone into the construction of the road. There's terrain that's been taken into account. There's a lot of effort that's gone into the construction to make it easy for people to travel from one place to another. Therefore, because of the effort that's gone in, the Tao is the best way to take you from where you are now to where you want to go in your life. So Lao Zi makes the point previously that we talked about. He basically said that all sensible people will follow the Tao and not want to stray from the Tao. And the way he put it is that, hey, if I have just a little bit of sense, if I have any sense at all, I would follow the Tao. I would only fear to stray from the Tao. So keep your attention on that for the moment. And now I have a question for you. I have a question for everyone. This is a serious question for you to ponder. If you want to share your answers with me, I would be honored. You can always type in your answer. Whenever we have a travel-based metaphor like this for the journey of life, it invites the following questions. Think about your life as a journey. Then, obvious question is, where are you now in your life journey? Where would you say you are? And what brought you here will be another obvious question. What was the journey that you've already been on? Where did you come from? What situation, what life situation did you hail from? And most importantly, in this life journey, where are you going? Do you have a rough idea? At least a rough idea is what I'm hoping. So for the journey of life, it's important to think about past, present, and future. Past, where have I been? Present, where am I now? Future, what is the destination that I'm headed to? Previously, we talked about the flight of the paying bird. So there, it is using the flight instead of walking as the travel-based metaphor. The idea is the same. Where are you flying to? And the idea also is that when you follow and cultivate the Tao, you can take flight, you can soar. You don't have to walk it. You can be much more higher up, flying majestically toward your destination. You can go a lot further. So there's obviously a lot to be said for the travel-based metaphor. And today we're going to talk about other aspects of it. So as you can see, it's like I said, a very serious question. And there's a little bit more. I talked about the difference between the Great Tao and the side paths. So in the previous ancient era, where it was thought of as the well-trodden path, The idea is that people may leave that path, go off on their own. And perhaps it's because they want to blaze a new trail. Now, what the ancient sages had observed is that people who did that, try to blaze a new trail, usually ended up not getting very far. And that's because there's already a lot of people that had done so in the past. They hadn't really found a better way, and therefore the new trail that they had blazed, which perhaps ended up in a dead end, they had now become overgrown with growth, with plants, and therefore no longer recognized as a path. Unlike the well-trodden path that remains reliable year after year. Now, what about the modern metaphor of the paved road? Well, we know that people drive off the road for various reasons. So this is even more fitting as a metaphor because a lot of times we know that people drive off-road for fun, for seeking a venture, so to speak. But eventually, they have to return to the road. They always do. It's time to go home, return to the road. Time to proceed to your next destination. The off-road adventure is over and done with. Gotta get back. So for both the well-trodden path and the paved road, the idea behind the side path is similar. The motivation may be to seek novelty and adventure, something new, something interesting. More often than not, as the sages have observed, what people end up getting is not so much excitement, but exhaustion. So this is where the actual journey through life is a little bit different than your off-road adventuring with your SUV, four-wheel drive, and so forth. Usually what happens is that if you do that with your life, seeking novelty, seeking something new and interesting, looking for a shortcut, is that you end up exhausting yourself. And you end up back on the proven path. So that's where things are a little bit different. And now I can see that everyone has given this some thought. Everyone has done some reflection of your own life journey. This is fantastic. Thank you, the people who have responded. I take your response very seriously. Now it is time for us to go further into the discussion using the actual lines of the Daodejing. So I mentioned before that we got to the end of that section about the side paths. What I started talking about last time is that this is actually one of the central ideas, one of the important ideas from the Daodejing. Therefore, it is repeated multiple times. And I want to highlight one point in this slide that I showed you last time. This same concept in chapter 53 also appeared in chapters 41 and 45. So there's quite a bit to it that I want to explore with you, starting with its appearance in 41. Now, of course, those of you who have been following this talk in some cases for years and years, you've already seen it. So I want to bring it back as a reminder. And those of you who have not seen it, you may find the correspondence to be rather interesting. So in chapter 41, line 11, the translation is, "The smooth Tao appears uneven." So the smooth Tao is the first two translation of the first two characters. And when we explained the smooth Tao, I talked about how this is a reference to line 4 of Daodejing 53, which is what we're on right now. So that was a reference forward in time. This is now a reference back in time. So the very first character is the character for the wide, flat, easy to walk avenue. Then the second character is the Tao. So the wide, flat, easy to walk character is translated as the smooth Tao. Smooth Tao, as in a smooth journey, a smooth trip. So the Tao is a broad and plain avenue, easy to walk. Now, this particular line has two more characters, basically says, well, even though it's in reality smooth and easy, it doesn't seem that way to many people because people are always looking for shortcuts. The Tao is simple. We human beings like to make things complicated. We do that to ourselves. We do that all the time. This is one of the ways. And people do that because they want the quote-unquote secret knowledge, secret technique, secrets that will let them win big for little or no effort. You see this all the time in every aspect of life. People want to do less and get more. Now, it's actually possible when you master the Tao, you find there are actual opportunities in life where you can expend a little effort for optimal gain. But when most people are starting out, they haven't really mastered the Tao at all, but they're seeking those pivotal leverages just the same. And because they haven't mastered the Tao, they usually end up wasting a lot of time. They may be investigating all kinds of tempting little shortcuts and then finding out that they circle right back or they're dead ends. Mastering the Tao is about putting in the work. In reality, there's no substitute for that. So as early as 41, Lao Tzu talks about the Tao as the smooth path. And then in 45 as well, that's the next reference, that's the next callback. So once again, to review, this reference uses different characters, but it expresses the same idea. Chapter 45. Great straightness seems bent. Line 5. This is what we spent quite a bit of time on to talk about in 45. And the image kind of tells the story here. The image in this slide, it shows this winding road. And it allows vehicles to drive up and down the mountain in a very efficient way, in the most efficient way possible. Now, it's the best path to navigate this particular mountainous terrain. That's the way it is in reality. Now, human beings, we know that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So when we look at something like this, it doesn't seem like the straight line of our imagination. It looks like it curves back and forth a lot. Now, living in the real world, we still know that this is the best way, is just to stick to the road and drive through the different bends and twists, work your way up and down, no problem. But when it comes to spirituality, though, people become very tempted to cut through. So when we look at this from an overhead perspective, top-down perspective, it kind of looks like this. So you see, when we look at it this way, it is sort of like the way we look at spirituality. A lot of the details, the context, the terrain, the height difference becomes lost in this overhead view. Then all we can think about is that, I can save some time by going from one point to another point without going through all the curves in between. Now, even though the best idea in spirituality is to follow the path that's been marked out by the sages, we're kind of rebellious. We never listen, so we still want to do what we think is right. We're being too clever for our own good, and just like a car driving off the road going down directly, you quickly run into problems. So this is why the Tao is called the Great Straightness. It doesn't look straight, but it's the best path. In that context, it's the shortest distance between 2 points. So this was from 45, and I find that it's useful to remind ourselves occasionally on some of the concepts that get repeated because they become important. We have to keep in mind that the road has been constructed for specific reasons. And in the same way, we have to remember that Tao cultivation is the way it is because the ancient sages had figured out the best way to travel. And it also becomes clear that as we cultivate the Tao, we're really navigating human nature rather than mountainous terrain. So now, let me summarize everything that you have just heard in this one slide, starting with the path through this peaceful scene representing the Great Tao. In chapter 41, we had this line 11, that says, the smooth Tao appears uneven. Then, in 45, we had this line that says, great straightness seems bent. And now you have seen why that is. And this brings us back to 53, our current focus. The Great Tao is broad and plain. What can we take away from all this? Well, nothing happens overnight. The problems in life that we've had up until now, this is the reason why I'd ask everybody to reflect on your life journey up until this point in time. Where did you come from? What was the journey that you've already taken that took you here? Life problems are usually decades in the making, so we cannot reasonably expect instant solutions. These problems don't go away with a snap of a finger. We have to work at it, better ourselves little by little, resolve these issues gradually. That's one takeaway, that the process simply takes time. Second point is that out there in the real world, there are charlatans who charge exorbitant fees promising quick results. What happens when there's a quick change? It is far more likely to be a temporary change. Easy come, easy go. Actual change should be lasting. The lasting change is the true change, and it requires long-term commitment. In that context, I applaud everyone who's been sticking with this discussion on the Tao for years now. And that's because this stuff really does take some time to digest, to absorb, to become one with. And when that is the case, when you have integrated the Tao into your life, you see that it starts from the inside out. And it's always about getting your own ducks in a row before you try to help other people. It's always about saving yourself, then you can save others. And out of all this, the emphasis from Lao Tzu is that forget about shortcuts. There are no shortcuts. You just have to be guided by your conscience. Take one step after another on the path. When you have mastered the path, you will see opportunities for actual, genuine acceleration, not before. So let me summarize everything that we have talked about with this slide right here. As you can see, I've got the Great Tao on the left-hand side. I've got side paths on the right-hand side. These are the characteristics of the Great Tao versus the side paths. The Great Tao is straight, as in great straightness. Physically, it may not seem straight, but it's the Great Straightness, and that represents the straightforward path. It's direct, it's open to all. There are no special requirements to walk the path. Just by you wanting to, here we are, all together to talk about the Tao. Applications to life. The Tao is meant to be applied to life, and the applications are simple. There should not be anything convoluted or complicated. That's not the Tao. Everything should be, what we call, when we say straight, we talk about straightforward, we talk about being a straight shooter. It's all about being transparent, all about being above board in everything that you do. This is the complement or the opposite to the side paths. The side paths are twisted. So straight and twisted, these are sort of meta-level descriptions. Here, the twisted side paths, the twistedness, it means they are hidden, shrouded in shadows. Side paths are deceptive. Side paths tend to promise a lot, but then never deliver. Instant enlightenment may be promised, but will never be delivered. And when you fail to gain that enlightenment as promised, it's the fault of not being able to do that is going to be put on you. Oh, you didn't follow the directions exactly. You didn't work hard enough. Anyhow, that's not the Tao. Secondly, we have a description of the Great Tao being wide. So this is a way to talk about how we can all travel together on the Great Tao. It accommodates all of us. It's wide. The wide path welcomes all. It is meant for us, for traveling with friends, for having travel companions. How cool is that? I love that about the Tao. The side paths are narrow, and even though when you get into some of these fringe practices, there may be a whole bunch of other people, you can make friends, but they're still narrow in the context of being isolated. That, as an example, you may have cult-like practices that seek to isolate you from your family and friends. Don't trust them. Trust only the cult leader. The side paths lead to impractical and extreme views, but especially the impractical. Impractical views like, as I have referred to in the past, views like, I'm already perfect, I don't need to do anything. Or, all I have to do is to think and visualize, and good things will occur in my life. So these become impractical very quickly. They are not the proven path. They are not the path that will predictably, reliably take you where you want to go. And lastly, I describe the Great Tao as flat in the context of being smooth and even. And this is metaphorical language to talk about the life journey that is easy, that is graceful, that requires no striving, no strenuous effort. If you are working so hard that it's an impediment to your health, you are definitely not on the Tao. The side paths are rough, quote unquote rough. And this is an indication to talk about how side paths become basically a life full of problems. There's contention, there's anger, there's resentment, there's complexity. Whereas the life with the graceful, effortless flow is the simple life with minimal drama. So then now you can see why it is so important for Lao Tzu to talk about the difference between the two and why he reiterated in many different ways throughout the entire Daodejing. So how can we be sure that this chart here represents what Lao Tzu originally intended for us? I would suggest just by reading and understanding what this chapter actually says, it will become very clear, I think, to all of us. So we now will look at the other side. What happens when people don't follow the Tao? What happens when they veer off into the side paths that are not the Tao? We begin with the 3 lines on the manifestations of negativity in life. Starting with line 6, translated as the courts are corrupt. So the last character in this line is translated as corrupt. So I want to talk about that just for a quick moment. This character is Chu. The meaning in modern Mandarin, modern Chinese, is to divide. Like mathematical division is Chu. It also means to remove, to eliminate, like 去除, to get rid of. So the modern context is not the meaning that was used in ancient times. In this particular line, it's using a tangential related meaning that is no longer used in modern language, in modern Chinese. In ancient times, the related meaning has to do with corruption. Corruption is that which divides people. And this, you can tell, is the opposite of being unified in a spiritual harmony. That will be the Tao. To be divided, to be at odds with one another, will be the very opposite of the Tao. And that's where the corruption is a source and also an effect. Corruption divides. And it's precisely because corruption breeds chaos and contention. It turns people against one another. So now you can see there are times in the Daodejing, because language has evolved in the last 2,500 years, a particular character that is used in a certain way in modern Mandarin was not used that way in ancient Chinese. Mandarin itself is started out as a dialect of mainland Chinese in ancient times. Modern Mandarin has its roots in the northeastern part of ancient China. Anyhow, let's continue on. We will incorporate the understanding of that character into the entire line. So what is the meaning that Lao Tzu is trying to get at here? Well, in the previous section, remember, it's all about the great Tao and the side paths. Lao Tzu was just pointing out that that there was a huge difference between the right path, the Tao, and the many possible side paths. Here, starting in line 6, Lao Tzu is pointing out the wrong paths, the side paths, the not Tao, the un-Tao, in a very specific way. Corruption, meaning corruption being the first in his description of that which is not the Tao. Specifically, he pointed to corruption in the ruling hierarchy. let me pause here for a moment and just remind everyone that anytime you see references in the Daodejing about the ruling class, the ruling elite, the ruler, or the ruling hierarchy, it's talking about your role as the ruler of your life. So everything that it talks about should be completely applicable to what you're doing, being in charge of your life and your destiny. Okay? Always keep in mind that they will apply, and in this case, they do. When you apply this idea, corruption in the ancient ruling hierarchy of an ancient kingdom, take it to now, take it to today, your life, the current moment in your life journey. Corruption can show up. This is just one example out of many. We're about to get much, much more specific. Corruption can show up as learning Tao teachings, but not applying them to your life. In other words, being inconsistent in what you learn and what you actually practice, or what you perhaps even teach other people, but can't do yourself. So the constant Tao, the practice of the constant Tao, is also consistent in that what you say is no different than what you actually do. That's important in Tao cultivation. So jumping off of here, we'll use this as sort of a starting point. We're about to speak on the ways that people can have this spiritual corruption in the core of their being. So it's a pretty big discussion. We're gonna do one slide per line, starting with line 6. Then we're gonna take a break and then do line 7 and line 8. So let's keep our attention focused on this idea. The courts are corrupt. How would that apply to you in modern life? When we talk about the courts, I think it's evident that we're talking about ancient China. So the title on top, the courts are corrupt. And then you see a couple of graphics. The graphic on the left, this is a dilapidated castle. I'm using this neglected castle as symbolic of the courts being corrupt. To the right, we have a person who is suffering from the effects of negativity in life. So to the left, ancient metaphor. To the right, modern life. How can we understand what Lao Zi was saying and then apply it to the here and now? So first of all, the ancient metaphors about the ruler and the ministers being corrupt and self-serving. When you apply that to your life now, it's basically talking about you're the ruler, your spiritual core has been corrupted by egocentric desires. We know that this is what Lao Tzu meant because of the lines that we'll follow. So we're coming back to basically talk about the meaning. This is sort of a foreshadow of what is to come. Now, because the rulers and the ministers were corrupt and self-serving, they neglected the needs of the kingdom or the empire. So they did not build or maintain the infrastructure. By that, I mean the roads, the bridges, the fortress, etc. in ancient times. If you were to apply that to modern life, your life, what will happen if there's a corruption or chaos or complexity that is affecting your spiritual core? Well, some of the effects become apparent. Problems start creeping into your life. You say you'll do something about them, but you haven't yet. This is the neglect. You know that there are some problems. You know things are not perfect. You know you should do something, and you talk about it, but you don't actually do it. Neglect. So for the ancient ruler and ministers, everything is status quo. That is, they just wanted to enjoy their lives of luxury. They did not want to bother with new initiatives, reforms, explorations, nothing. So when you apply that to modern life, with you as the ruler, stuck in a rut, you are spinning your wheels, going nowhere. You feel unmotivated, uninspired. So nothing new in your life, learning no new lessons, just kind of everything repeating a monotonous pattern while things fall apart. You begin to feel that you are lacking peace of mind, and perhaps health and fitness are not doing so well either. So these are the manifestations of spiritual corruption. Let's get right into the next line and explore more along the same idea. What are the manifestations when you are not traversing in accordance with the Tao, but maybe even contrary to it, or maybe lost in a side path? Let's take a look at line 7. The fields are barren. So I want to isolate one character to show everyone. I think it's a fun character. I think it's a character that everyone will enjoy learning something about. And that's the first character that you see in this line. It is Tian. Pinyin suggests Tian. Okay, that's close, but not quite. It's Tian. What does it mean? Well, it's actually rice fields. This began as a pictographic representation of rice fields when looked at from a height, maybe a nearby hill. Looking at the rice fields, it's divided up neatly into squares. You've seen photos of the rice fields looking exactly like that. So it's a basic character that hasn't changed all through the centuries. It means the same thing today. Farmland, fields, as it did in ancient times, because it was a predominantly agrarian society, agricultural society. And so you can see it. You can, just by looking at it, it's a simple line drawing of fields in a farm. So I think that's actually kind of fun. I think that's something that, because it's so visual and people, like to be able to see something, it also points out, it underlines the fact that this other language, Chinese, is very different, has a very different paradigm than the alphabet-based languages like English. So now let's talk about the entire line. What do we mean when we say the fields are barren? Now, of course, in ancient times, as I said, agrarian society, heavily focused and reliant, dependent upon agriculture. So the ancient times, if the fields turned out to be barren for a particular season, this would be a dire sign of famine to come. This was a big deal. So that's it for ancient times. What about you in the modern age? You can apply that easily by thinking about the harvest as work production. Applying to you, it just means that your personal productivity dries up. And this is not necessarily just work related. It could be your work in multiple areas of your life. This is meant to be a generic description of the overall pattern that you're going through. Your productivity may be down in multiple aspects of your life. What is the cause? Well, it's what we had talked about just now in line 6, the chaos, the corruption, the complexity, the strife that is in your spiritual core, the lack of peace of mind, and things that we will talk about more. Let's explore in the next slide. The next slide will talk about how line 6 feeds into line 7, and then I think the overall concept will become that much clearer. So similar layout to the slide. The fields are barren, divided up into the ancient metaphor represented by the castle there, and then the modern life represented by this gentleman in despair. So what do we mean about the fields being barren? Well, first of all, the cause is from the previous line about the ruler and the ministers being corrupt and self-serving. They taxed the people heavily, and the heavy taxation was due to their desires to fulfill their own enjoyment of the good life. Heavy taxation in this context manifests in your life as the troubled spirit imposing a burden on everything you try to do. Spirituality becomes very important when you think about the widespread impact that it has in every aspect of life. You can't get away from it. Everything comes from that spiritual core. Then back to the ancient metaphor. Because of the heavy taxation, because of the corruption of the ruling elite, there's bureaucratic requirements. No matter what you try to accomplish, you are delayed, stopped, impeded every step of the way. So everything you try to accomplish is more difficult. Certainly much more difficult than for the average person, for the peasants who try to survive. Even survival became more difficult for them. Then how about for you? How about for someone who is dealing with negativity, not on the right path? Well, bureaucratic requirements making things more difficult become like self-sabotage. You get in your own way, you make things more complicated for yourself. Have we done that? Well, I can share with everyone, I personally have definitely done that to myself. I can't blame it on anybody. I know what I did. I know how I make things more difficult, more challenging to me. Nobody else is to blame but me. Even when I try to get things going, it falls flat or it falls apart. So then let's go back to ancient times. Let's look at the peasants. Because of the heavy taxation, because of the bureaucratic requirements, the people lacked motivation to work. Resources go to waste. Agricultural production is way down. So these are all negative results that flow directly first from the corruption in the ruling elite, and then manifesting as the way that the kingdom is actually managed. So for you, the way this manifests is that you quickly realize the work that you do is far below your true potential. You are capable of so much more. You are not showing any of that. You're just going through the motions. One day after another. You know you're not living up to your potential, and you remember a time when you did live up to your potential and that it was joyous, it was happy, But when you are not on the path, that joy, that happiness will not be your reality. Let's look at the third and last line in this depiction of the negative manifestations of not being on the right path. This one says the warehouses are empty. So here you want to immediately think about the warehouse as metaphorical, not an actual warehouse. It is being used as an analogy for other things. If we were to break down the characters one by one, here's what we will get. The three characters, the first character there, that's the character for warehouse. No other way really to translate that. Perhaps you can say storage. So warehouse, storage, similar. The character in the middle, that's the character for very. And then the last character there, 虚, means empty. So the warehouse, which could be plural, it's contextual. So the warehouses are very empty. As I pointed out, this line flows from line 7, just as line 7 flows from line 6. How does that work? Well, the course of corruption, and that leads to all kinds of problems for the people, the subjects of the kingdom. So the fields are not worked on, the fields become barren, and that leads to the warehouses being empty. So that's what this bullet shows. Since the fields are barren, there's no harvest to fill the warehouse. And the grains that were stored in the warehouse before, it gets used up quickly. So how would we relate that to life? Well, this one's easy. It's about the state of emptiness. And this is not the emptiness in the Tao where we talk about how we now have room to breathe, room to move around, room to enjoy. That's a very positive kind of emptiness. This kind of emptiness we're talking about, the emptiness of the warehouse, it's a gnawing emptiness in the heart. It's the negative kind of emptiness. And that negativity is manifesting in all aspects of life. And we know when we use up the grains that were stored in this metaphorical warehouse, when we use it all up, there's nothing left. So this can show up as a bad financial situation, bad personal relationships. The financial situation may become evident as you having trouble keeping a balance in your bank account, as an example. Whatever you had saved before, like the grains in the warehouse, it gets depleted very quickly. And some people we know get into trouble. There's delinquency of the loans, foreclosure, all kinds of stuff. So let's explore. Let's talk about how this ancient metaphor applies to modern life. The warehouses are empty. Again, we have the same layout, ancient metaphor on the left, modern life on the right. Everything's connected in these three lines. So right off the bat, we want to say the lack of agricultural production means little or no harvest. How does that match the experience of negativity when you are not on the right path? Well, the inability to function at your best produces negative consequences, quite naturally. So then let's talk about resources. The empty warehouse is a symbol for the depletion of resources in the kingdom overall. So it isn't just the warehouses that are empty, it's also, for instance, the royal treasury because of the corruption of the ruler, the ministers. And for you living your life, you can easily map this to what can often happen when you are not on the right path, the natural flow of affluence stops. You begin to have trouble in that aspect of life. You start using up the resources you set aside before. You had done that saving for a rainy day. Well, the rainy day has come. So in ancient times, when you have the empty warehouse, it's alarming because the possibility of famine and starvation becomes all too real. In your life, it has even more implications. Not just the financial aspects. Emptiness, that gnawing negative emptiness, becomes the norm for your life in all aspects, not just the material, but also the intangibles. For instance, let me give you one example. Let me talk about the metaphorical warehouse of friendship. Suppose you have a warehouse for storing friendship. When it is full of bountiful harvest, it means that you are doing well in the social aspects of your life. You've got good friends who are supportive. You are glad to spend time with them. They enjoy your company. It's all good for everybody. At the same time, you can also have a friendship warehouse that is almost empty. So how would that be in your life? Well, one way to tell is that perhaps friends disappear. You experience loneliness. Nobody wants to spend time with you. Nobody wants to have anything to do with you because of the negativity you have exhibited. Perhaps you have shown your resentment, your anger. You rage at everything, so your friends stay away. They, quote unquote, ghost you. So that's one way that you can end up with an empty warehouse for friendship. Or you may still have your friends, but then you realize that these quote unquote friends are not the people who can help you become better. These are not the people who are inspirational from your perspective. They may even drag you down to their level. It's very true, the saying that, show me your friends, and I will show you who you truly are, because our friends are a reflection of us. So I have a slide about this idea of the friendship warehouse being empty or full. So this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's useful. I think it's valuable. I want to ask everyone to think about your friends. Are your friends the kind of people you admire and respect? Perhaps not all of them. Are some of them the people that you admire and respect? Do you wish to emulate them? Do you want to become more like them? Can they inspire you to that extent? So in life, here's my observation. Oftentimes, people associate with those that they perceive as being below them. And this is mostly to make them feel better about themselves. In comparison with other people, they feel like they're doing pretty well. Well, this can lead to complacency. If you have a lot of friends like that, people that you perceive as being below you, then your warehouse is actually empty, although you may have a number of friends. And so the first two bullets are all about the kind of people you associate with. Most of the time, the association takes place without any conscious attempt for you to shape it in a certain way. But I'm going to suggest that this is something to reconsider. Next bullet point is about the question that I asked everybody at the beginning of today's meeting. Where are you going in the journey of life? So let me ask about your friends. Do they know what your aspirations are in life? Do they even know? What are your dreams, your visions for the future? Do they know what they are? And if not, they're more acquaintances than close friends. Do they understand your practice of Tao cultivation, if you consider yourself as having a practice? If not, then perhaps they are more like acquaintances. If they do they support you? Are they supportive of you in moving towards your goals, whatever they may be? How do they support you? Do they encourage you? Do they throw a wet towel upon the whole thing? Do they play devil's advocate? Do they really understand what your aspirations, your goals, dreams, visions, do they know what those things mean to you? And do they hold you accountable for living up to your ideals? Perhaps you have expressed to your close friends what your ideals are, what you hope for yourself. And they encourage you to move toward that. So far, so good. But the real good friends are the ones that know what you need may be different. Those things that you need may be different from what you want. They hold you accountable. They ask about, hey, how's it going with this plan of yours? Do they do that, or do they let you off the hook? These are all different ways to assess the fullness, the capacity of your friendship warehouse, your metaphorical warehouse for storing friendship energy. Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it empty? So here's the bottom line. When the Tao is present in your life, you become intentional in shaping your social circle. This has the nice effect of filling up your warehouse of friendship to the brim, to bursting at the seams. So this is just one of the many ways to apply this idea about the empty warehouse. It's not just financial, it's not work productivity, it's all of the above and more. And here you have seen me apply it to the concept of social connections, of friendship. So we're now ready to summarize what we have talked about, the 3 lines. And the 3 lines represent manifestations of the wrong path. And as you can see to the left, I have the translation, just in a slightly different form, but they say the same thing. The courts are corrupt, the fields are barren, the warehouses are empty. So let's summarize what it means in ancient times and what it means to you. When the courts are corrupt, it just means the ruling elites did not care. They administered poorly, if at all. And you can easily map that to you not really doing a great job in managing your life. And that's because the Tao is missing from your life. You have strayed from the path. This leads to the fields are barren. Because of the corruption, the fields become barren, producing nothing. How about for you? Well, the chaos in your life, the lack of peace of mind prevents you from being productive. This in turn leads to the warehouses being empty. So due to the lack of harvest, there's nothing to be stored in the warehouse. Obviously, for you, without the positive energy of productivity, an empty void comes into every aspect of life. So this is just an easy way to visualize the metaphors in ancient times and how it applies to your life today, kind of simplified and streamlined so you can see it all in a glance in one slide. Now, we're going to have to start diving into yet another aspect of the negative manifestation starting from line 9. Here, it is about the ruling class. So the translation for line 9, officials wear fineries. In this section, Lao Tzu is critical, very critical, of the corrupt ruling class, pulling no punches. He's critical because while the kingdom suffers, these people in a ruling hierarchy wear extravagant attire. So that is the meaning of fineries. It just means a superficial appearance of extravagance. And this can be applied to you as well. Fineries, the appearance of luxury, can be a pattern where you put up a superficial front of extravagance. You know, you are not doing that well, but you want to project a different image. So, hence the facade, the superficial front. You don't want people to know how bad you are really doing. So what about the next line? What about the sharp swords? In this case, the sharp sword is the symbol of domineering aggression. So for the ruling class in ancient times, this was the tool of intimidation. It's the weapon, it's the threat of physical harm. What about for you? How would this negativity manifest in modern times? Well, this in our world would be ego-based attacks. So the idea is really simple. For the ancient rulers, they used it against people to keep them down as a tool of oppression. Your ego-based attack, your sword, is ready to cut other people down to size if they say something that you don't like. In other words, this is about the person who's on the wrong path being defensive, getting very defensive about being on the wrong path. It's denial. It's counterattack. So what about the next line? Fill up on drinks and food. Well, now that we kind of get the hang of the metaphorical language, we can see that drinks and food isn't just, things that you drink and eat. It's about pleasures of all kinds. Drinks and food in this context represents material pleasures, the things that you enjoy. So here, with this line, what Lao Tzu is saying is that the common people, the peasants, have less and less. We talked about famine and starvation. The people may be starving, but the corrupt rulers waste more and more. So there's definitely a huge gap between the two. So we can apply this to our lives as well. And it's easy. This is sort of a straightforward mapping from ancient times to today. It's about overconsumption. It's about spending money we don't have. And either way, whether it's ancient times or modern life, this is a pattern that manifests right before total collapse. What I mean by total collapse is that in ancient times, it would be the fall of the empire, the fall of a dynasty displaced by a new dynasty. which has happened many times throughout Chinese history. Today, in the modern world, for you, the total collapse may be financial. For instance, declaring bankruptcy, getting calls from collection agencies. The collapse may be health-oriented, like serious illness. It may be mental well-being in terms of scope, like an emotional breakdown, like freaking out, losing control. It can also be some combination of the above, and one can lead to the other. The stress of financial pressures can lead to health issues, and certainly mental breakdown can result from any number of causes, all of which quite negative. Perhaps you are maxing out on credit cards, you don't know where the next paycheck is coming from, perhaps you're accumulating debt. All of these puts enormous pressure on your mental well-being. So this is what I mean by total collapse. Not something to be taken lightly. So then the last thing to talk about is acquire excess wealth. This is similar to the previous line where Lao Tzu points out that the wealthy gain more while the peasants starve. And this is also in terms of accumulation, excessive accumulation, and we see this as in our world as hoarding, to get much more material things than we actually need. Of course, this is still happening today. While the ruler appears to have everything, in reality, the kingdom has become desperately poor. And I would say that Lao Tzu can be very accurate about our world today because he spoke about the human condition, that is, human nature that has not changed one iota in 2,500 years. So this whole idea here, the ruler appears to have everything. In reality, the kingdom has become desperately poor. So applied to life, this is the difference between appearance and reality. It's about delusional denial. You may pretend everything is great. You may believe that things are about to turn around, but at the heart of it all is the empty warehouse. It is desperation. Now, looking at the time, I see that this is all we can get through today, but this is good because we now are close to the end. So as expected, as planned, in the next meeting, we'll be able to conclude our discussion of 53. For now, though, we're getting close to the top of the hour, so let's go ahead and jump to the summary. We had a discussion of this chapter last time, and therefore we should revisit quickly the summary we had before as part 1, and then we can go over part 2, which is the summary for today. In part 1, it was mostly about the Great Tao and the side paths. So if you recall from before, we talked about the Great Path. To walk the Great Path being the best thing that we can do for ourselves. It is open, it is wide, it's the fastest, best way, it's the proven path. It's the way that brings you happiness. But then people look for side paths. So the suggestion that I offered last time was that you must always bring healthy skepticism to everything that you come across. And you must be especially wary of books or teachers that promise to quote unquote, turbocharge anything in your life. Not just, spirituality, but everything else. So that was the summary from last time. What about part 2? Here's part 2. It's sort of like yin and yang. Last time we talked about the great path, how the great path is smooth, even, easy to walk, it's wide. We get to travel that with all of our friends. It's awesome. Now, being on the great path, last time, what Lao Tzu expressed was that if I know even just a little bit, I will walk the great path, and I will only be afraid to stray from the great path. Yin and yang. This time, we're talking about what will happen, what is most likely to happen when you are on the wrong path. And it's a warning from Lao Tzu to beware of the wrong path. To the right-hand side of the slide, the summary slide, we have the negative manifestations from the ruling class. And remember, when I talk about the ruling class, I'm talking about you and me. We are the ruling class of our own lives, our private little kingdoms. So the warning is about Lao Tzu saying these are the things that we should not do, that we should be careful to engage in. Number 1, never project a false front. This is what Fineries was getting at. Tao cultivators must always be true to themselves, must always be consistent. Number 2, never intimidate anyone. That's the sharp sword. Tao cultivators must always use the gentle approach, the soft approach. And this, in fact, is a major point from chapter 52. Number 3, never overindulge. This is the part about the food and drinks. Tao cultivators enjoy everything in moderation. Because overindulgence, we know, leads to all kinds of problems. It can shorten one's life. Very serious about that. Therefore, Tao cultivators recognize that ironically, moderate enjoyment, never overdoing it, it actually maximizes long-term enjoyment. If you enjoy life and you want to enjoy more of it, the best way to do it is to enjoy in moderation. Lastly, never hoard anything. So as we look around in the world, we see many people who do hoard a whole bunch of resources that they don't really need. Tao cultivators seek to be different, share resources out of compassion. So these are the takeaways from what we have just discussed. I'm very happy that we were able to get to the end of that section that makes this summary really come to life, in my opinion. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us all travel safely so we can meet again. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.